Shaq was minding his own business when a wealthy man sneered, "People like you should be grateful for whatever you get." The mansion went silent. People stared. Cameras rolled. But instead of arguing, Shaq smiled, because he had a plan. What he did next shattered the man's career, broke the internet, and turned arrogance into a lesson the world would never forget. Stay till the end, because this story will leave you speechless. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Shaquille O'Neal leaned back on his couch, his massive hands gripping his phone as he scrolled through his feed. His usual late-night routine was filled with funny clips, game highlights, and the occasional meme. But tonight, something different caught his attention. A video, grainy but clear enough to spark outrage, dominated his screen. A delivery driver, young, nervous, his uniform slightly wrinkled, stood at the doorstep of a colossal mansion. A tall, middle-aged man in a silk robe glared at him with a look of sheer disgust. "You call this on time?" the man snapped, arms crossed. The driver barely got a word in before the rich man yanked the food bag from his hands. He rummaged inside, pulled out a steaming container, took a bite, then spat it onto the ground. Shaq's brows furrowed. "This is disgusting," the man sneered. "You people can't even do one simple job, right?" Then, with the kind of arrogance that made Shaq's stomach turn, the man reached into his pocket, pulled out a crumpled $1 bill, and flicked it at the driver's feet. "Consider yourself tipped." The door slammed shut. Shaq stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. The internet was already on fire. "This is actually sickening. I hope this driver gets a raise and this clown loses everything. Rich people really out here acting like royalty in 2024? Shaq exhaled slowly, shaking his head. He had spent years proving that money and fame didn't define a person's worth. He had seen how society treated people who worked hard, who showed up every day just trying to make ends meet. And now watching this, it wasn't just frustrating. It was personal. His lips curled into a slow, knowing smirk. "All right then," he muttered. Reaching for his phone, he hit speed dial. The call barely rang before a familiar voice picked up. "Yo, big man, what's up?" Shaq leaned forward, his massive frame tensing with excitement. "Get me a uniform." A pause, then laughter. "What? Why?" Shaq chuckled. "I'm about to have some fun." Shaq's about to go undercover, but will people really treat him differently when they don't know who he is? The air inside the delivery hub was thick with the scent of stale coffee and sweat. Grease-stained menus cluttered the front counter, and behind it, a dozen workers moved at breakneck speed, assembling bags of food, shouting orders, and dodging one another like seasoned warriors in a chaotic battlefield. Shaq stepped inside, his massive frame slightly hunched to avoid drawing too much attention. The disguise was simple but effective. An oversized hoodie, a worn-out baseball cap pulled low, and a fake mustache that itched like hell. Nobody even looked up. Perfect. For the first time in years, he was invisible. Not Shaquille O'Neal, the NBA legend. Not the larger-than-life celebrity. Just another guy trying to make ends meet. And damn, it felt different. "Hey, you deaf or something?" Shaq blinked as a sharp voice cut through the noise. A wiry man with a clipboard stomped toward him, his face twisted in irritation. He wore a faded red company polo, the word manager embroidered on the chest like a badge of misplaced authority. "You're late," the man snapped, jabbing a pen toward Shaq's chest. "Customers don't wait, rookie." Shaq almost laughed. Rookie? This dude had no idea, but he played along, keeping his voice low and neutral. "Yes, sir." The manager rolled his eyes and shoved a bulky, grease-slicked bag into Shaq's hands. "You got a big order. VIP client. Rich neighborhood. Don't mess it up." Shaq glanced at the address stapled to the bag. His eyes flickered with recognition. He knew this place. He adjusted the weight in his hands, nodded, and strode toward the exit. Outside, the night was cool, the streetlights buzzing faintly overhead. Shaq slid into the beat-up delivery car they'd assigned him, a dented sedan that smelled of fried chicken and desperation. The GPS flickered to life. Destination: an elite gated community on the other side of town. Shaq exhaled, gripping the wheel. He'd been on the other side of those gates more times than he could count. Mansions with fountains in their driveways, security guards at every corner, homeowners who only acknowledged people like him when they were handing them their car keys. But tonight, he wasn't rolling up in a Bentley. Tonight, he was just the help. The drive was long, the city shifting around him as he moved from the working-class streets to roads lined with towering palm trees and private golf courses. By the time he reached the neighborhood, the contrast was staggering. Silent roads, spotless sidewalks, and driveways large enough to park an entire restaurant staff. The gate buzzed open after a quick security check. He eased the car into the community, following the GPS until he reached the house. Massive, glistening windows, a chandelier visible from the street, the kind of place that made people feel untouchable. Shaq put the car in park, grabbed the bag, and stepped out. The weight of the moment settled on him. This was it. He was about to walk into a reality that millions of workers live through every day, a reality he had been shielded from for most of his life. Would they see him, acknowledge him, treat him with basic respect? Or would he be just another faceless delivery guy, dismissed the second he handed over the food? Shaq took a deep breath, adjusted his hoodie, and walked up the marble steps. He knocked. Shaq has no idea what's about to happen when that door swings open. The door swung open before Shaq could even lower his hand from the doorbell. A tall, middle-aged man stood in the doorway, his expression already laced with irritation. He wore a silk robe over tailored slacks, a glass of red wine dangling from his manicured fingers. His salt and pepper hair was slicked back with meticulous precision. Behind him, the mansion stretched into an opulent abyss, crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and a grand piano that looked like it had never been touched. Jameson Whitmore III. Shaq recognized the name immediately. Restaurant mogul, millionaire investor, and apparently a world-class jerk. "Took you long enough," Jameson sneered, eyes scanning Shaq like he was something stuck to the bottom of his Italian loafers. "What, did you get lost?" Shaq kept his expression neutral. "Had to wait on the chef, sir." He extended the bag of food, feeling the warmth seep through the paper. Jameson scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Pfft, people like you always have excuses." Shaq felt a flicker of heat rise in his chest. "People like me?" He tightened his grip on the bag for half a second before releasing it into Jameson's outstretched hand. He could feel the man's disdain like a thick fog in the air. Jameson barely acknowledged the exchange. He turned on his heel, stepping back into his mansion. But just before he disappeared inside, he reached into his robe pocket. A crumpled bill emerged, a $1. Jameson didn't even look at Shaq as he flicked it toward the ground, the bill tumbling in slow motion before landing near Shaq's worn sneakers. "Don't spend it all in one place," Jameson muttered, amusement curling at the edge of his voice. Shaq didn't move. He didn't blink. For a second, the world went quiet. Jameson turned, about to shut the door, when something in the air changed. A tension so thick it felt like the room had just dropped in temperature. Shaq's hand curled into a loose fist at his side. This guy just made the biggest mistake of his life. Shaq freezes. This guy just made the biggest mistake of his life. The crumpled dollar bill sat at Shaq's feet, an insult wrapped in faded green paper. The moment stretched long and thin, like a rubber band about to snap. The soft rustling of palm trees in the night breeze, the distant hum of a luxury car's engine purring down the street. Everything felt muted under the weight of the moment. Shaq bent down, slowly, deliberately, and picked up the bill between two fingers. He rolled it between his thumb and forefinger, staring at it like it was a foreign object. Then he looked up. "That's your tip?" His voice was calm, almost conversational, but there was an undercurrent to it. Something unreadable, something dangerous. Jameson leaned against the doorframe, his smirk widening. He sipped from his wineglass, unbothered, unshaken. "You should be grateful. That's more than you deserve." Shaq exhaled through his nose, a quiet chuckle escaping his lips. He glanced down at the bill again, then back at Jameson. "Huh." He tilted his head slightly. "You ever worked a delivery job before?" Jameson scoffed, his amusement morphing into condescension. "People like me don't work for people like you." There it was. The quiet part said out loud. Shaq studied him for a long second, the corners of his mouth twitching in something that could have been amusement or something else entirely. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly, shaking his head as if mentally filing this moment away. "Noted," he muttered, his tone unreadable. Jameson, mistaking Shaq's calm for submission, took another self-satisfied sip of his wine. He turned already halfway through the door, ready to leave the help in his driveway like discarded trash. But Shaq wasn't done. Not yet. His patience was running thin, but he had a much better way to handle this. Shaq's patience is running out, but he has a better way to handle this. Shaq didn't get mad. He Didn't argue. He didn't even let his expression change. Instead, he did something far more unsettling. He smiled. Jameson had no idea what was coming. Shaq turned on his heel and walked back toward his car, moving slowly, deliberately. The crumpled dollar was still in his grip, the insult burning into his palm. He could feel Jameson's dismissive gaze on his back, probably already forgetting about him, probably thinking he'd just sent another nobody back to whatever hole he came from. He had no clue who he'd just messed with. Sliding into the driver's seat, Shaq didn't start the engine. Instead, he pulled out his phone and made a call. A deep voice answered on the first ring. "Yo, Shaq, what's good?" "I need a favor," Shaq said, keeping his tone casual. "Find out who owns this mansion." There was a pause on the other end, then a quiet chuckle. "You in some kind of trouble, big man?" "Nah," Shaq smirked. "Somebody just forgot their place." "Say less. Give me 5 minutes." Shaq leaned back in his seat, watching the golden lights of the mansion flicker through the windshield. This wasn't just about some jerk with a superiority complex. This was bigger. This was about something Shaq had seen his entire life. People who looked down on others just because they thought money made them better. That mentality, it needed a reality check. His phone buzzed. "Got your answer," his guy said. "House is owned by Jameson Whitmore III. That name ring a bell?" Shaq's smirk deepened. "Oh yeah, I know that name." Jameson Whitmore III wasn't just some spoiled rich guy. He was the owner of one of the most exclusive fine dining restaurant chains in the country. The kind of place that charged $500 for a steak, where reservations had to be made months in advance, where the same people Jameson looked down on probably cooked his meals and cleaned his tables. Shaq let out a low chuckle. "Oh, this just got interesting." He tossed the crumpled dollar onto the passenger seat, his mind already racing with possibilities. Jameson thought he was above food service, thought delivery drivers were beneath him. Shaq was about to flip the script. He put the car into drive, rolling away from the mansion. But he wasn't leaving for good. No, this was just the beginning. Jameson had disrespected the wrong guy, and he was about to find out exactly what that meant. Jameson just disrespected the wrong guy, and he's about to find out. Shaq exhaled, rolling his shoulders as he stepped out of the car. The cool night air did little to cool the heat simmering inside him. Jameson thought he had everything figured out, thought he could treat people like dirt just because he had money, power, and influence. Let's see how cocky he is now. Tugging off his fake mustache, Shaq adjusted his hoodie before flipping it down. He was done pretending. His broad frame stretched under the streetlights as he turned back toward the mansion, moving with slow, deliberate steps. He rang the doorbell. Once, twice. A shuffle sounded from inside, followed by an annoyed groan. A few seconds later, the door yanked open, and there stood Jameson Whitmore III, his wine glass still in hand, eyes half-lidded with impatience. "What now?" Jameson snapped, not even looking up at first. Then he did, and everything changed. His face, which had been oozing arrogance moments ago, suddenly drained of color. His grip on the wine glass tightened, his knuckles whitening. He blinked, eyes flicking up and down Shaq's towering frame, like his brain was struggling to catch up. "Shaq!" Jameson's voice cracked. "No way!" Shaq smirked, taking a lazy step forward, his sheer presence forcing Jameson back into the entryway. "Yeah," Shaq said, voice smooth, calculated. "And I just found out you work for one of my restaurants." Jameson's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He blinked rapidly, his wine glass trembling slightly. Shaq let that sink in for a moment, watching as the realization settled like a boulder on Jameson's chest. The man who stood there just minutes ago, flicking a crumpled dollar bill at Shaq's feet like he was nothing, was now completely speechless. "Well, what do you mean?" Jameson finally stammered, clearing his throat as if trying to regain some control. "That's not—" Shaq tilted his head, his smirk deepening. "You own Whitmore Fine Dining, don't you?" Jameson hesitated. "Well, yes, but—" "And who do you think owns a stake in that chain?" Silence. Shaq pulled out his phone and scrolled for a second before holding it up. On the screen was an official document listing shareholders. Shaquille O'Neal, 15%. Jameson's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. His confident smirk had been completely wiped away. "So technically," Shaq said, tucking his phone away, "you don't just work for me, you answer to me." Jameson took a stumbling step back, nearly knocking over a decorative vase near the entryway. His lips parted, trying to form words, excuses, anything to explain himself. But Shaq wasn't done. You see, Shaq continued, his voice lower now, carrying weight. I don't mind if a man's rich. I don't mind if he owns a fancy house, drives a fancy car. But what I do mind, he took another step closer, forcing Jameson to back up again, is when a man treats the people who keep his empire running like garbage. Jameson's breath quickened. He set the wine glass down with shaking fingers. Look, look, I didn't. Shaq held up a hand, silencing him. Save it. A long pause. Then Shaq chuckled, shaking his head. Man, you really thought I was just another driver, huh? Jameson had no response. He looked like a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. Shaq exhaled sharply and turned toward the door. We're going to have a conversation real soon. Then before stepping out, he glanced back. But first, I think you owe someone an apology. Jameson's face fell. He knew exactly who Shaq meant. Jameson stumbles backward. He just insulted his own boss, and now there's nowhere to hide. Jameson's breath was coming faster now, shallow and uneven. His mind scrambled for a way out, for some excuse that would undo the last 5 minutes. But there was none. Shaq stood in his doorway, arms crossed, gaze locked on him like a predator waiting for its prey to make a move. The sheer presence of him filled the space, making Jameson feel small, a feeling he wasn't used to. Look, man, Jameson stammered, his voice cracking as he forced a weak laugh. I didn't know it was you. Shaq arched an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. Would you have treated me differently if you did? Silence. Jameson's throat bobbed as he struggled for an answer. He wanted to say yes, to lie, to backpedal his way out of this mess. But even in his panicked state, he knew the truth was written all over his face. Shaq let out a slow breath and shook his head. That's the problem, man. His voice was calm. Too calm. That was somehow worse than if he'd been yelling. Jameson felt his stomach tighten. Shaq reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, the sleek device glinting under the chandelier's glow. I'm making some calls. The words were simple, but the weight behind them hit Jameson like a truck. His eyes widened. Wait, calls? To who? He forced another laugh, this one more desperate. Come on, man, let's not blow this out of proportion. Shaq didn't answer. He was already scrolling. His expression didn't change, didn't falter. Jameson felt his pulse hammering against his ribs. His mind raced through the worst-case scenarios. He knew Shaq had connections, big ones. Investors, CEOs, media outlets, people who could end him with a single conversation. If word got out that he, Jameson Whitmore III, the face of high-end dining, had been caught treating service workers like trash, his brand would be in flames before morning. No, Jameson blurted, stepping forward. Look, let's be reasonable here. His voice cracked slightly. We can work this out, right? Shaq paused mid-scroll, lifting his gaze. Reasonable? He let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head. You weren't too reasonable when you threw $1 at my feet, were you? Jameson's face burned. He had no answer. Shaq's thumb hovered over a name on his phone. Jameson swallowed hard. Please. That was all he could manage. Just one desperate word. Shaq studied him for a moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Then he pressed the call button. Jameson's heart stopped. Jameson's career is on the line, and he knows it. Shaq didn't believe in revenge. He believed in justice. Jameson stood frozen in the doorway, his normally smug face pale with fear. His fingers twitched at his sides and his lips parted, as if searching for words that might save him. But there were none, because Shaq wasn't just some delivery guy he could brush off, and Jameson wasn't just some arrogant millionaire who could walk away from this. Shaq put the phone to his ear. The line rang once, twice. Then a voice answered. Shaq, what's up, big man? Shaq's grin was slow and deliberate. Hey, you know one of your managers treats delivery workers like trash. The voice on the other end went silent, then measured. Tell me everything. Shaq turned his gaze back to Jameson, whose face had gone an alarming shade of gray. Oh, don't worry, I'll do one better. He tapped his phone screen and sent the video. The footage of Jameson sneering, flicking a crumpled dollar at Shaq's feet, and muttering, "People like you always have excuses." Jameson flinched as the sound of a notification dinged from the other end of the line. There was a long pause. Then the CEO's voice, cold and sharp. Tell me that's not Jameson Whitmore. Shaq chuckled. Oh, it's him, all right. A heavy sigh crackled through the speaker. Unbelievable. This is exactly what we don't stand for. A beat of silence. Then more decisively, "Send me the full video. We're handling this tonight." Shaq grinned, already hitting send. Jameson's entire body stiffened, his hands curled. Into fists, his breath shallow. "Wait, this is unnecessary, man. We can work something out." His voice was climbing into desperation. Shaq cocked his head. "Oh, now you want to negotiate?" Jameson swallowed hard, stepping forward. This, this could ruin me." Shaq tucked his phone into his pocket and met Jameson's gaze, his expression unreadable. "You should have thought about that before you treated someone like dirt just because you thought you could." Jameson opened his mouth again, then stopped, because his own phone vibrated in his pocket. His boss had just seen everything. Jameson's boss just saw everything. Jameson's phone buzzed in his pocket like a ticking time bomb. He hesitated. He already knew who it was. He could feel the weight of Shaq's gaze on him, could see the satisfaction flickering behind those sharp, knowing eyes. His hands were clammy, his throat dry. The phone rang again. Slowly, as if dragging out his own execution, Jameson pulled it from his pocket and stared at the screen. CEO, Elliot Harrington. The blood drained from his face. He swallowed hard, fingers trembling as he answered. "Hello, sir. I can explain. You're fired." The words cut through the air like a blade, sharp and cold. Jameson's mouth fell open, but no sound came out. His brain scrambled for something, anything that might undo the damage. But sir, You embarrassed the entire brand, Jameson." Elliot's voice was like iron. "I have zero tolerance for this kind of behavior. I saw the footage myself." Jameson's knees nearly buckled. His entire empire, his reputation, his wealth, everything was slipping through his fingers. "Sir, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "It was a misunderstanding. This delivery guy set me up." A bitter laugh escaped Shaq's lips, but he said nothing. He didn't have to. Elliot wasn't buying it. "Oh, so you're the victim now?" The CEO's voice dripped with disgust. "Save it. You were caught on camera degrading someone just trying to do their job." Jameson opened his mouth again, but Elliot cut him off. "Pack your things, effective immediately." Click. The call went dead. Jameson stood frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear, as if willing it to ring again, to undo what had just happened. But it wouldn't. His hands dropped to his sides, his shoulders slumped. He had lost everything. Shaq turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Tough break, huh?" Jameson didn't respond. His entire world had just collapsed around him. He staggered backward, his legs weak. Then finally he slumped to the floor. Jameson slumps to the floor. Jameson Whitmore III sat motionless on the marble floor of his grand foyer, his hands limp at his sides, his once proud posture reduced to a defeated slump. His phone was still in his grasp, the call from his CEO lingering like the last breath of a dying man. His empire, his entire identity, had just crumbled with two words: "You're fired." Shaq took in the sight, exhaling slowly. He wasn't the type to revel in another man's downfall, but there was something deeply satisfying about watching a man like Jameson face the consequences of his own arrogance. But Shaq wasn't done yet. He turned away from Jameson's broken figure and stepped outside, the crisp night air cooling the fire still simmering in his chest. This whole thing had started because of one man, someone who had been disrespected, humiliated, and tossed aside like he didn't matter. Shaq knew better. That driver and millions like him were the backbone of society. They deserved better. And Shaq was about to do something about it. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his messages. It didn't take long to find the link, the viral video that started it all. With one tap, he played it back, this time watching with a different purpose. The young driver in the video stood stiffly at Jameson's doorstep, his uniform slightly wrinkled, his shoulders hunched under the weight of exhaustion. The way Jameson had sneered at him, the way he had flicked that crumpled dollar bill to the ground like he was tossing scraps to a stray dog. Shaq felt his jaw tighten all over again. This wasn't just about Jameson's downfall. This was about justice. Without hesitation, Shaq tapped the number that had been attached to the video when it was first posted. A few rings. Then, "Hello?" The voice on the other end was cautious, tired, the same voice from the video. Shaq smiled. "Hey, man, you still working deliveries tonight?" There was a pause. Yeah. Who's this?" Shaq leaned against his car, his grin widening. "The guy who just put Jameson Whitmore out of a job." Silence. Then a sharp inhale. No way, the driver breathed. That was you? Yup, Shaq chuckled. And I got a question for you. Oh, okay. The driver's voice was hesitant, like he wasn't sure if this was some elaborate prank. Shaq didn't waste time. How would you like a better job? Silence again. This time, even longer. The driver was speechless. What? He finally stammered. Are you serious? Shaq nodded, though the guy couldn't see him. I don't play around, man. I own restaurants, a lot of them. You ever thought about something bigger than running deliveries? The driver laughed. Not a joyful laugh, but one of disbelief. Dude, I make minimum wage. I've never even set foot in a five-star restaurant except to drop off food at the back door. Shaq's expression softened. He had been there before. The feeling of knowing you were worth more, but never being given a chance to prove it. Well, Shaq said, his voice steady. How about we change that? The driver didn't respond right away. Shaq could hear the faint sounds of traffic in the background, maybe even the muffled voices of another restaurant staffer calling out orders. Finally, the guy exhaled sharply. What's the catch? Shaq grinned. No catch. Just one condition. The driver hesitated. Which is? Shaq's voice was firm, but kind. That you remember where you started. That you never treat someone the way Jameson treated you. The line was silent again, but this time, Shaq could feel the shift in energy. You got yourself a deal. Shaq smiled. Good. Now let's get you out of that delivery gig. Shaq just turned one man's bad day into the opportunity of a lifetime. The night air was cool against Shaq's skin as he stepped away from the mansion. His job here was done. Jameson Whitmore III, the man who had built his success on arrogance and privilege, had just been brought face to face with the consequences of his actions. But before Shaq could take another step, a voice called out behind him, uncertain, almost unrecognizable. Wait! Shaq paused. Slowly he turned. Jameson was still sitting on the floor of his grand foyer, his back pressed against the leg of an expensive leather chair. He looked small now, his confidence drained from him like water down a cracked pipe. His hands gripped his phone tightly, as if hoping that somehow it would ring again, undoing what had just happened. His lips parted slightly before he spoke again, his voice uneven. Is there anything I can do? Shaq studied him for a moment. The question wasn't just about getting his job back. No, this was something deeper. For the first time, Shaq didn't see an arrogant millionaire. He saw a man who was lost. Jameson had spent his life believing that power and wealth gave him the right to look down on others. Now he was realizing he had built everything on sand, and the tide had just come in. Shaq exhaled slowly, letting the silence stretch between them. No anger, no gloating. Just a truth Jameson needed to hear. Yeah, Shaq said, his voice calm but firm. Start treating people like they matter. Jameson blinked. He wasn't expecting that. His shoulders tensed, his fingers tightening around his phone. His eyes darted away for a second, as if trying to grasp onto the life he had before tonight. But it was gone. That simple sentence, so easy yet so heavy, landed harder than any punishment could. Jameson opened his mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to defend himself, but nothing came out. For the first time, he had nothing to say. Shaq held his gaze a second longer, then nodded to himself. He turned and walked down the marble steps, leaving Jameson alone in the vast emptiness of his mansion. Jameson didn't call out again. He just sat there staring after Shaq, his face blank, but his mind racing, because those words would haunt him forever. Jameson's face falls. The video spread like wildfire. Within hours, social media was ablaze with clips of the confrontation. The moment Jameson flicked that crumpled dollar onto the ground, the moment he sneered, "People like you always have excuses," the moment he realized he had just humiliated the wrong guy. Screenshots flooded Twitter. Headlines popped up on news sites. Restaurant mogul humiliated after mistreating delivery driver by his own boss. Millions watched as Jameson's arrogance turned to panic. The video of him stammering, begging for his job, was dissected frame by frame. And the internet did what it did best. Shaq did it again. Karma hits different when Shaq is delivering it. This is why you treat everyone with respect. TikTok was flooded with reaction videos. People reenacted the scene, tossing crumpled dollar bills and dramatically gasping when the delivery driver removed his disguise. Memes exploded across Instagram. Even celebrities chimed in. Couldn't have happened to a better guy, one NBA star tweeted. I hope Jameson's new job involves actual customer service. A comedian joked. Jameson's name trended at #1, but not in the way he ever imagined. His Wikipedia page was edited within minutes, briefly listing his occupation as former entitled millionaire. Brands started distancing themselves. His restaurant chain's PR team scrambled, issuing a statement. Whitmore Fine Dining does not condone the behavior seen in the viral video. Effective immediately, Jameson Whitmore III is no longer associated with our brand. It was over. And Jameson? Jameson stayed silent. No posts, no apologies, no press conferences. He had vanished. Meanwhile, Shaq leaned back on his couch, scrolling through the chaos with an amused grin. His notifications were blowing up. Friends, fans, business partners, even old teammates. But Shaq? He just chuckled. He knew this wasn't about going viral. This was about something bigger. He set his phone down and exhaled. Some lessons? He muttered to himself, shaking his head. Gotta be learned the hard way. And Jameson? He'll never forget this day.